I want to just take a moment to, of course, introduce our incredibly brilliant and wonderful She Recovers coach, Dr. Cynthia Phelps, who is here to present with us today. We're so grateful, so grateful for your time. And this topic that she's going to bring forward, using your inner voice to thrive in recovery, has been a huge part of my personal pathway of recovery as well. This has been one of the biggest barriers that I've had to smash through. One of the things that I still, primarily continue to work on today. So I'm personally extremely excited about this session. Cynthia Phelps, Dr. Cynthia Phelps, is a researcher, international speaker. She recovers coach, certified mindfulness instructor, and founder of InnerAlly, a company that builds evidence-based tools to improve resilience and well-being. She teaches about the power of having a kind and compassionate inner voice and guides people to explore their own emotional landscape to create customized inner support language. Dr. Phelps has 25 years of experience in digital interactive design and has been developing techniques from online classes to mobile apps to help people learn and change their behavior. She has created an accessible, easy way to develop your own self-compassionate InnerAlly voice. So with that, with no further introduction needed, I would love to turn the floor over to Dr. Cynthia Phelps. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that introduction. And I'm excited to hear that this is relevant to your own recovery as well. That's fabulous. Well, I think I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it here and share my screen. We're going to talk about the inner voice and thriving in recovery. So I'm wondering if maybe you might be missing a critical piece of your recovery. This was something that happened to me, and it's one of those things where, there's information that you know that you need to know, but you don't know, but then there's that information that you don't know that you don't know. And this was kind of my story. I had been in recovery for a while, but I was not very healthy in recovery, and I didn't really want to quit drinking. Alcohol was my drug of choice. And I was really suffering a lot. I was trying to pretend to be a normal drinker, and it wasn't working for me. And I possibly had the most nerdy recovery moment ever. And that was when I was reading a research article on self-compassion. It was like an aha moment for me. It was the puzzle piece that was missing in my recovery. And ever since that moment, I began to learn more about self-compassion and how to practice it. And now I teach other people, and it has been a really delightful recovery. So that is what I'm here to share today. So I'm going to hypothesize that an InnerAlly voice, or that kind and supportive inner voice, may be the secret sauce that you could be missing, or it's the thing that you can add to your recovery to make it just a little bit better. An InnerAlly voice is actually a core practice of something called self-compassion. And so we're going to kind of get into that a little bit more. But the InnerAlly voice is just how you speak to yourself, and it really represents the relationship that you have with yourself. And so being able to have a compassionate relationship with yourself is really important. And oftentimes, you might start with a definition, like what is self-compassion? But I wanted to be a little bit more kind of hands-on today and see if maybe we could experience some of this for ourselves. And so I'm going to ask you to do a little visualizing with me today. And so I always do all of my meditations or visualizations in a very compassionate, a self-compassionate way, which means that if at any time during this that you need to drop out and not follow along, or if you just want to do something and just listen, all of those things are fine. The most important thing is that you're taking good care of yourself and being compassionate to yourself. So for those who are able and willing, if you would, you might just close your eyes or cast your eyes downward. We're just going to do a little visualizing. And we're going to imagine a situation where maybe a friend or a loved one in the last couple of weeks was suffering just a little bit. Maybe they got a piece of bad news, or maybe it was something that happened to them, or maybe it was even something that they really regretted that they said, and they were just feeling bad. If you can, if many kind of situations come to mind for you, just narrow it down to one that you can work with today. And so this person might have called you, or you might have run into them, and they expressed this suffering. Just allowing your mind to kind of put yourself back in that one situation with that person. And I want you to consider for yourself, when they told you about this thing that was causing them grief, what did you say to them? Perhaps even wondering, what tone of voice did you use? Maybe a soft or caring, kind voice. Or maybe a fierce, protective voice. Did you offer them anything? Now, just taking a moment to bid that friend well, maybe giving them some well wishes, sending them on our way. Now, I want you to return to yourself. And I want you to think about a time that you were struggling, maybe over the past few weeks or months. Just for today, maybe not something that was super hard, but just a little annoyance, a little grievance. Maybe somebody hurt your feelings. Now, I want you to consider when you were feeling not so great in that moment, what was it that you said to yourself? Or if you maybe didn't say anything, what were you feeling towards yourselves? Did you do anything to take care of yourself in the moment? And now allowing yourself just to take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, just releasing some of that suffering that you had experienced, sending yourself some love and compassion for having gone through that. And now allowing yourself to gently open your eyes and come back into the room, back to the presentation. One of the reasons that we do this presentation is to really find out how we treat ourselves versus how we treat another. And so when we're talking about treating someone else that's suffering, it's pretty easy for us. We're kind of wired to notice when other people are suffering. It's really pretty natural for us to show kindness and support and to speak some really kind and supportive words to another person, especially friends or loved ones that we know that are suffering, right? We're really wired for compassion. This is one of the things that keeps us in community and in relationships. This is a survival skill that we have naturally. Now, what happens when we try to turn that skill in towards ourselves? Sometimes we can just come up with a blank. Sometimes we may not even notice that we're suffering or give it any mind after somebody hurts our feelings or something happens to us. The first step is to really notice, to be able to show some compassion to yourself. And the next is actually showing yourself kindness and support. Maybe it's speaking kind and supportive words to yourself. Maybe it's doing something to help yourself, like taking yourself out of the situation or giving yourself a pause, or doing something supportive for yourself, like eating something healthy or going on a walk or calling a friend. These are all things that you can do to practice self-compassion. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is what self-compassion is not, because there's some resistance. And when I say some, like, it's actually in the research literature. So it's really well documented. There's research to people not wanting to be self-compassionate. And they say a variety of things. They say, oh, it sounds narcissistic or self-centered, selfish, indulgent, weak. All of these things I hear whenever I go to teach self-compassion from people. And I can very easily go down this list and tell you that the research supports the fact that being self-compassionate is always leads to better outcomes than not being kind to yourself. And so, in fact, you may think it's self-centered, but if you are kinder to yourself, the research shows that you're better at taking care of other people. We know that it's not selfish or indulgent because one of the things that self-compassion does is it actually makes it easier to control your behaviors and to have behaviors that are healthy for yourself. And it's definitely not selfish, because the stronger we are at taking care of ourselves, the more we have to offer others. And from all of the talk that's going around with depression and burnout and overwhelm right now, these are things that self-compassion can help you address. And when you're in that state of burnout or overwhelm, you can't be helpful. And so self-compassion is really a powerful way to be mentally healthy. It's definitely not weakness. And in fact, being self-compassion can be one of the strongest things that you can do for yourself. And it's not lazy. And it's definitely not self-pity, because self-pity is kind of this like, oh, woe is me, where self-compassion is about doing something proactive and positive for yourself. And so self-pity will lead to kind of isolation and, not really wanting to engage with other people. Self-compassion as very pro-social, it actually leads to you being better able to kind of reach out and get support. So I just wanted to kind of push some of those myths to the side so that we can get on with it, because self-compassion and being your own inner ally is associated with all kinds of super awesome stuff. So if you're high in levels of self-compassion, then you're going to have lower levels of depression, less stress and anxiety. You'll be able to form and keep better relationships. As I said before, you'll be better able to change your behavior. When we look at how people are with their work and self-compassion, we notice that they tend to be more productive. They're more innovative and creative. They actually have better resilience, which means when something bad happens, it's easier to kind of pick yourself up off the floor and keep going. Something that we really need in recovery. And my research that I published in 2018 actually showed a correlation between low self-compassion and an increased risk for addiction. And we looked at alcohol, cannabis, and opioids. And so there is a huge bang for your buck if you are willing and able to practice self-compassion and to raise your levels of self-compassion. So what does this have to do with recovery, right? Well, we know there's that little bit of research that I did that showed that it increased your risk if you weren't kind to yourself. But there are more and more research studies that are coming out every day that are showing the relationship between self-compassion and addiction recovery and relapse, and basically your overall well-being while you're in recovery. And there's two major ways where it kind of intersects with your recovery. One is recovery capital. And so if you've not heard of this term, it's basically a way to describe a way of building up yourself to be stronger and more resilient against relapse or against having some kind of going back into that kind of addictive cycle, if you will. And the most gentle way of saying it is basically recovery capital helps prevent these unwanted behaviors that harm us. And so oftentimes in recovery, we have to deal with things like shame and self-criticism. And if we can use self-compassion and be kind to ourselves, it really helps to improve our own recovery capital. It is a thing that you can practice and get better at. And so that when you do hear your inner critic pop up, or you do really feel ashamed for, maybe the stigma of addiction or something you did or something from your past, you can really help yourself in that moment with some kind and supportive words. The other thing that where self-compassion and addiction recovery really intersect is emotional regulation. And so emotional regulation is like, how good are you at when you get upset, being able to calm yourself down? Being able to regulate your emotional state so that you don't lash out or you don't do a behavior that you're going to regret later. And so you can see how this would be really important in recovery. It's also important in your recovery relationships, in all of your relationships, really, if you can better control your emotions, you have got a better chance of making connections and really keeping good relationships. And so self-compassion is really important to your recovery. And so this is kind of the latest model. The Recovery Capital and Emotional Regulation was published in 2019, but there's more and more research that I believe is going to show that you're really going to be able to improve your recovery if you also add self-compassion into the mix. So most of the research that is out there right now is a association or like a correlation type research, which means we don't really know if it's causal. And so with the research that I did, when I showed like your level of self-compassion was high, then your risk for addiction was low. We know these are correlated, but we don't know like which one causes which, right? And so oftentimes I get this question like, well, what is it, right? Is self-compassion, is it people who are low in self-compassion, do they go into addiction more frequently? Or is it once you get into addiction, then your self-compassion is lowered and then you stay in addiction? And so we don't actually know the answer to this question yet because the research is pretty preliminary at this point. But there is certainly research out there that shows that childhood trauma is something that is, if you've had childhood trauma, then your odds that you have low self-compassion are much higher. And also, we also know that people vary genetically. I'm sure you've heard that maybe like a happiness set point is something that is genetically controlled. And so some people are just naturally more happy and some people just aren't. And it doesn't have to do with any of their experiences. It's kind of a set point that they have. And then once you get into addiction, one of the problems is that there is often a lot of shame and stigma that is associated with being in addiction, being stuck in that cycle. And also, if you really look at it, and this is kind of what sealed the deal for me when I read about the self-compassion research, is I had this realization that every time that I drank, I was actually harming myself. Even if the immediate effects were kind of to release some stress or some tension, the long-term effects for me, pretty immediately, the next day or whatever, was that I was much worse off. I was more anxious. I was more depressed. And so being stuck in that maladaptive behavior of taking a drink when I was feeling stressed or for whatever reason, that was actively harming me. So I was self-harming. And so anytime anyone's stuck in this cycle of behavior where they can't get out, that is a harmful behavior. And so self-harm is kind of the exact opposite of self-compassion. And so I think we're going to be able to learn more in the future about how to kind of tease some of these things out. But for now, you just need to know that it's associated, and it's pretty strongly associated. Now, self-compassion is something that is not just a kind of a personality trait or a quality, which it is. We can measure it, but it's also a skill. It's something that you can learn how to do. And I was definitely very low on the scale of self-compassion when I first bumped into this research. And one of the things that I think is the most important is that also a practice, and it's something that you can practice and get better at. So, how do you practice self-compassion? So one of the ways is that you can meet suffering with an InnerAlly voice. So what do I mean by that? When we're suffering, the most important first step is to really acknowledge, like to be aware that you're actually suffering, because so many of us have been so good at like stuffing it down that we sometimes don't even recognize when we're in emotional pain, and maybe even sometimes, physical pain. We just try to ignore it all. But self-compassion says that you're able to be aware and to meet that discomfort that you have, whether it's emotional or physical, with some soothing. And it may just be something as simple as calming your nervous system down by putting your hand over your heart and taking a deep breath. This is something that is physiologically shown to kind of lower your heart rate and to calm and soothe you through two different mechanisms, that the parasympathetic nervous system and also the oxytocin system. This one is kind of what slows you down out of fight or flight. And the oxytocin system is the one that you most often hear it when mothers are breastfeeding. It's the hormone that's released then, but it's also released in other ways. And so physical touch is something that does that. And so soothing yourself is a way to show self-compassion, accepting yourself for who you are. And then also this reframing is so important. How do you use your inner voice to basically have a conversation with yourself, to be your own ally, your own cheerleader, your own mentor? So that sounds pretty easy, right? You just talk to yourself nice. So I'm going to bust myself here just a little bit, because this is a story about me. And I like to think of myself as pretty smart. And I had read all the research articles in self-compassion. I had taken the classes, and I was at the very end of my teacher training to learn how to teach people to be self-compassionate. And I was taking class from Dr. Kristen Neff, who's one of the premier researchers in the area. And she told this story, which incidentally, I had already read in her book. I thought I knew what was going on. She told this story about how she was suffering because she was in the grocery store, and her son, who was probably about 10 or 11 at the time, and he's autistic, had an epic meltdown, on the floor, kicking, screaming, red faced. One of those things where there's really nothing that you can do in the moment, that just needs to play out. And she, for us teachers, modeled her behavior. She put her hand over her heart and she said to herself, "Oh, darling, I am so sorry you're having to go through this. This is so hard. It's going to get better." And I was sitting in class and my mind was like, I had never spoke to myself in that kind of voice before. And in that moment, like I had this instant realization that I was missing the inner voice piece of how to practice self-compassion. I was missing this core piece of self-compassion. And so that's kind of what happened for me is I developed like when that moment happened and I heard her speak to stuff and that voice, that is when the grandmother came into my mind, like everybody's avatar grandmother, like the best grandmother that there is. That's what came into my mind. And that spurred a bunch of research where I came up with characters that all represent emotional needs that can really help you be able to practice this inner voice. Because I really thought I had it licked, like I thought I knew what I was doing, and I was missing this huge piece because a lot of us get our inner voices from our early childhood caregivers. And it just so happened that mine had a very self-critical, really inner bully type of an inner voice. And being around that person, I adopted that inner language for myself. And so I had no kind inner language. And I had no idea what I needed emotionally to be able to thrive. And so that is why I have developed this InnerAlly system. And so the words that you're seeing on the screen right now, security, success, serenity, forgiveness, these are based on a body of research that comes out of schema therapy. And it has to do with basically these things are the opposite of maladaptive behaviors, the common maladaptive behaviors that people show up in therapy to try to fix. And so these are in the research literature, they're called core emotional needs, but I call them the InnerAlly superpowers because what they do is they give you an idea about not only like, you have to be kind and supportive of yourself, but like, what do you actually talk to yourself about? If you're going to create inner kind and supportive language, well, this is the answer. And so when I work with people, we try to figure out what is it that core emotional need that they have, or what InnerAlly or what InnerAlly superpower are they going to work with? And an easy way for you to do this is I've got a quiz on my homepage, InnerAlly.com, and it's called something like Who's Your InnerAlly? And so that is actually a psychological quiz to determine which core emotional need is the thing that you can nurture to give yourself the best chance of thriving emotionally. And so when you're creating your own inner language, you want to kind of consider, like, what is it that I really need? And so there's a variety of ways that you can get to this. Just asking yourself is one. And another thing that you can do is you can kind of soften your inner language. And so I'm sure you've heard of positive affirmations like, I am wealthy, I am successful. With compassionate inner language, we want to really make sure we can soften the phrase a bit and say something more like, may I be able to do what it takes to be wealthy. Because this is a more kind way of speaking to yourself. Because sometimes positive affirmations can feel a little harsh. And so there's two ways you can kind of look at your own inner language. You can see if you say something to yourself that when you're trying to be kind and supportive, if your inner critic laughs at you, then that means you need to kind of recraft your phrase a bit. And maybe even soften it a little bit by starting your phrase with may I, or something like that. And you also want to check for the feel in your body that it has. You want to feel kind and supportive, or even like fierce and strong, and really feeling like you're empowered by these phrases. Those are kind of two sides to self-compassion. That's the kind and sweet and nurturing side, and then the fierce and protective side. And we really need them both. So these are some of the ways that I help people create this language. And then I always encourage people to practice. One of the things that we did when I was working on a mobile app for the mental health for veterans with PTSD was to teach them a breathing technique to be able to calm themselves down in the moment. Well, the thing is, when you are having a moment, that's not when you're trying to learn the breathing technique. And it's the same for your inner language. You want to get some phrases from yourself that really resonate well with you, and then you want to practice them, because you're going to need them when you're in a moment of suffering or something happens where you're not feeling well. And you want to be able to have some phrases that you've already kind of memorized or have handy. And that's one of the reasons, like, I have these little cards, is that you can write your phrase on the back. And so there's all kinds of ways you can practice with phrases. And now I wanted to just give you a little tiny quiz, because I want to know if this is going to be something that's really going to be beneficial for you. So if you can, get out a pad of paper and a pen, or just something to take notes on. You could even use your phone. And I'm going to give you 5 questions. And if you answer yes, I just want you to put 1 hash mark down. And so here's the first question. Do you find that you're harder on yourself than other people? 1 hash mark for each one. And here's the second one. Do you say things to yourself that you would never say to another person? When you make a mistake, do you tend to beat up on yourself or ruminate on it? And number 4, when you're struggling or suffering, is your first impulse to isolate or to hide? Do you feel like when you have a problem that nobody else really understands? So if you have a high number of hash marks, like 4 or 5, then it would be an excellent idea for you to further explore this idea of self-compassion. If you're very low, like if you have 0, then this is something you don't need to work on. This is something that you've already got as a benefit for your recovery. And if you're somewhere in the middle, then you can choose to explore this or not. I've got a few references here. I'm sure these are going to be, the slides are going to be available on the She Recovers website. And I am always available to take questions via email. And I have my phone number up there. So I would love to hear from you and hear your stories if you have a self-compassion story. And now I'm going to turn it back over for a little Q&A.
Wow, wow, wow. First of all, I just want to take a moment to let that land in my own system and heart, and open the door to let it land for everyone in this space, because we just spent 30 minutes having a heart opening experience. And I just absolutely, I have lots of questions coming through already, but if anybody does have any additional questions for Cynthia, please do use the Q&A function so we can bring those forward for her and get them answered. But I love that you integrate, your own exploration of healing with your curiosity and your desire for research and to learn more, right? Because for me, as a spiritual skeptic, like, I heavily rely on the research to kind of open the door to allow me to feel, safe to receive. And so I really appreciate that you come to the table with that entire sort of rainbow of experience, because then I, as a participant, even am able to step in and really receive the body of your work. And I don't know if anybody else can relate to this, but even in the opening exercise, as a recovering codependent, my first impulse wasn't to notice or recognize my own suffering, right? And then I was questioning that. And then, of course, you brought that up as one of the first slides, because I can imagine that might be a very common sort of response for people, right? Is to sort of jump over that, because when perhaps I feel a hurt, it's like you said, it's a practice, right? And if I'm not practicing it and I'm not focusing on cultivating this inner ally, I do jump over to, justifying a behavior or being really curious about what might be going on for that person and giving them incredible amounts of grace, which, which we all deserve, right, to some degree. But like, I absolutely cannot forget myself in that process. So I'm so grateful just, for the very compassionate reminder, and the way that you bring this forward is kind of what I call like a yes and, right? It's like, yes, of course, people's intentions often don't match the impact, right, that it makes. But of course, I might still feel hurt by that, right? And how do I reconcile all those pieces within myself first, so then I can navigate the world, right, and in a more compassionate way? And I just, yeah, absolutely just have to reiterate, I love the way that you went through that, because it gives me space for all of those sort of pieces of myself without feeling ashamed that I care about other people, right? Just because somebody has hurt me doesn't necessarily mean that I can't care for them, right? But I just simply can't forget myself in the process. So yes, I'm so grateful for all of that. And the first question that I have to bring forward to you anonymously is, I'm so grateful you have included evidence-based practices and research. Where can I read more and check out the research that you've done? So if you do have any links that you're able to post in the chat for folks to check that out, we've got some interest to hear more. But is there a specific body of research of yours that you've done that you would recommend that we check out on your website?
Well, I think that I can't remember if I put the paper on there. One of the things that you can do is you can type in self-compassion and addiction recovery. And a lot of the references will come up. Google Scholar is a really great way to find the research. And so my paper, it comes up, if you put my last name in there, Phelps and addiction recovery, it'll probably come up, right at the top. And if you really want to read it, because it's behind a paywall, of course, just shoot me an email and I'll send you the full article for sure, because that's wonderful. And in that slide that I posted, I'm not going to go back, but one of the references was just published in 2019, and it has like a new model of how self-compassion works within recovery, and that would be a great paper to read if you're nerdy like me. And I don't have a lot of stuff on my new website, InnerAlly.com, but if you go to CynthiaPhelps.com, you can take a look at the recovery stuff on there. Eventually that website's going to go away. It's all going to get integrated in InnerAlly, but of course, websites are a work in progress. But yeah, there's so much exciting stuff that's happening in that space. And so, another thing I wanted to do actually, and I'm going to do it. Let's see, I can chat to everybody here. Can I plunk a file in here?
Of course.
I can. Because what I wanted to do is give you I wanted to give you the access to the cards. 2 seconds here. You go ahead and ask another question.
Well, that's great, because one of them is about the cards. So I'm just going to bring that forward while you're doing
Perfect.
it. They said, wow, what an incredible presentation. I find it so much more accessible to identify these characters, or I think you mentioned avatars, outside of myself, and then bring them inwards. Is there a reason psychologically that this is? Perhaps a reason it is easier to recognize these aspects in others than in ourselves. So I think they're saying, is there a reason why it's just easier to identify a grandmother externally to us versus the qualities of a caring and loving grandmother might have inside ourselves?
I try to do all of my stuff based on evidence, because that's just who I am and that's my strong suit. And also, like you were saying, it's a door that some people walk through where they're not willing to walk through a spiritual door or, some other door, right? And so the characters on the cards we largely pulled from different bodies. Like we looked at like Jungian psychology, we looked at like storytelling and Joseph Campbell, and we literally looked at video game archetypes and things like that. And so that piece of it, I would say it was more of an art than a science, like pairing the characters. But for me, when I saw the grandmother in my mind, when Kristen was speaking to herself that way, it was so powerful for me. And so we just did our best to kind of put the characters with, one of the things I would eventually, there's many things on the docket for InnerAlly. The cards are available on the website in kind of this prototype deck stage, where they're kind of fun. You can write your own phrases on the back. And then I just posted the PDF. To everybody that says InnerAllies.pdf in the chat. If you click on that, you get a lot more information than just what's on the cards. The cards are super fun to have because you can put them on your bathroom mirror, stick them in your wallet, put it, on your dashboard of your car, ways of kind of getting yourself to talk to yourself in a kind way. And it's just, they're fun to play with, they're fun. But I don't think and what I was going for over there is we're working on a mobile app as well. And so in this case, you might be able to swap your own images in for the characters because, we try pretty hard to make them resonate with like the most people possible, by, having a gender mix and trying to make them not any particular ethnicity. But yeah.
I love these different words as well that we can identify with, right? Like avatar, character, influence, archetype, right? Whatever works for us to pull those qualities in. And I super love the cards. I'm such a visual person, but I do also, like I said, I need that like body of work, the book, right? The corresponding components. So I'm so glad that you have that PDF resource for us as well. Somebody else has said, just a general comment, this was very good. I needed this and I've been in a very bad spot. So I haven't been able to find where to start on how to forgive myself. This definitely helped. So thank you. And I'm sure there's lots of reflections in the chat reverberating that as well.
The forgiveness piece is so important that we actually made an InnerAlly for it.
Of course.
and as you were talking as well, I think one of the ways you can conceptualize it is that here's your circle of compassion where you're so kind and wonderful and you take care of other people. We need to step into that circle ourselves, right? We need to be inside of our own circle of compassion. And maybe that is just a very beginning way that you can visualize that for yourself, stepping yourself into your circle of love that you have and make you the recipient of some love because you deserve it. And you're in recovery. You're here. This is great.
Yes, we absolutely deserve it. I mean, coming here can be even hard work, right? To face, for me to kind of re-acknowledge and face the fact and jump into that, having an InnerAlly is maybe not like an impulse that I have yet, regardless of how much time I've spent in recovery. Yeah, we super deserve to be held by ourselves and thankfully also by this community that we have here. The next question that I have is, do you feel there is a difference between self-compassion and self-care?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I think that I think that self-care kind of fits into the larger umbrella of self-compassion, quite frankly. Now, with the caveat, in our culture, oftentimes our culture is not self-compassionate. Let me just say that, right? Like we're not encouraged to love ourselves. That's called narcissistic or whatever, it can be not that valuable. People think it's bragging or whatever. So sometimes self-care can be promoted in a way that's kind of brutal, like, oh, you have to eat healthy and you have to do this. And it's like self-flagellation, like, oh, I didn't get my steps in, if self-care is showing up for you like that, then it's not inside the circle of self-compassion. But if you are your cheerleader and say like, oh, I only got 2,000 steps in today and I didn't meet my goal of 5, but it was a rough day and tomorrow I'm going to do better and I still love myself. Like, then you're inside the circle of self-compassion. And ideally you could put all of your self-care in there. And I think it's mostly a matter of just paying attention to how you're relating to yourself while you're doing the self-care. Are you torturing yourself with your self-care, or is it something that you're like, okay, because your self-care may look like going for a run, which isn't, necessarily easy or fun and sometimes, right? But how are you relating to yourself through that struggle? Are you like, yeah, 1 more mile, you can do it. Are you your inner cheerleader, or are you down on yourself for not being good enough at self-care? Don't do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And somebody in the chat has mentioned gentle reframing, of course, right? Like, I just love that, like gently reframing, because, other people might ask, like, when does self-compassion and sort of forgiveness start treading into the waters? I don't know if apathy is the right word, but kind of day after day, kind of letting yourself off the hook, right? But what I'm hearing is that it's the motivation behind, the choice to be compassionate and maybe not go for a run when you have a cold, right? Versus, just, kind of getting into maybe a depressive episode and staying in bed and having compassion for that, right? But it's sort of about the motivation and the gentle reframing, as somebody's mentioned.
Let me just reinforce that, because we know from the research that if you motivate yourself with compassion, you're going to have a better shot at reaching your goal. It doesn't matter what it is. And so, society and our culture tells us that we have to like crush it. We have to be really hard on ourselves. We have to work 24/7. We got, we have to have it all together. Like, that's not self-compassionate. And so if we can learn to have that inner ally voice where we're our own best friend, right? We've got our own pack. That is really what's more motivating. Like, here's a great example. If you're a mom, and you've got a kid and the kid comes home, with a bad grade, like, you wouldn't say like, oh my God, you got a D. I can't believe you. What's wrong with you? You would never say that, because it would completely demotivate your child to work harder in school, right? Like, here's a compassionate response, right? Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. You must have been really struggling in that subject. Let's talk about this and let's figure out how to make it work and how we're going to, that, right? Like, we're really clear that we wouldn't treat our child like that. Yet when we try to go to motivate ourselves to do something, like, we can treat ourselves like that. So yeah, just use that mindfulness, that awareness as your barometer, and just find out where you are and then gently reframe yourself. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. I could definitely use the invitation and reminder of that as well. The next question I have is, what does pro-social mean? I think you mentioned it kind of at the beginning of the presentation.
Yeah, sorry. I sometimes use really nerdy words. So pro-social, antisocial, I usually use those words when I describe the difference between shame and guilt. And so shame is an emotion that is not pro-social. It basically, when you experience shame, what you're saying to yourself is, I'm not good enough, or I am a terrible person, or I did it. It's like, I am broken, or there's something wrong inherently with me, right? Now, guilt says, I did a thing that was wrong, or I made a mistake, or I did something that I'm not proud of, right? And so one is me, the other one is behavior. And so that is a really important distinguishing factor between guilt and shame. And so I don't know if you know Brene Brown, but she's like the premier researcher in shame research. And so she actually said that self-compassion is the elixir for shame. And so there you have it, right? And so pro-social means like if you are feeling guilty, then that actually can be pro-social because you're recognizing your behavior is not ideal and you are more motivated to change it. Now, shame and not being self-compassionate to yourself, that is actually antisocial and it will cause you to isolate. It will cause depression and anxiety. And that would be the opposite of pro-social.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that explanation. Somebody else has asked, as a mother of a high needs child, I'm so grateful for Dr. Kristen Neff's story that you shared. I would love a recommendation of where to learn more about her and her work. If you've got, I know she's got lots of videos and stuff out there, perhaps you could share something.
Super easy. I would just go to self-compassion.org. That is her own personal website, and she's got all the things on there. I am actually trained in her modality, so I'm a certified teacher of mindful self-compassion. So I'm a big fangirl of her work.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know that she had a specific training too. I love that you've done that. I'm a fangirl too, but probably I there's some more things out there I could definitely learn about her work too. Somebody else has just mentioned, this is absolutely wonderful. I know that my self-compassion hasn't been as high as it could be, which leads to imposter syndrome. I am always more compassionate towards others than I am to myself. So this is such a useful exercise. On the plus side, I'm getting better.
And that the whole I'm getting better, that's such a compassionate phrase that you can say to yourself, right? Because it's acknowledging that you're working at it. And that's really compassionate. So thank you so much for sharing that.
And then somebody else has reflected as well. Thank you, Dr. Phelps. I love that self-compassion is a skill that can be practiced. Yes.
It's critical. You've got to get in there and practice it because you're going to want it next time life throws something really hard at you and you're suffering.
Yeah, so I don't see any more questions in the chat or the Q&A function for now. So just giving folks, 1 or 2 more minutes to bring forward any final reflections or curiosities that they have for Cynthia. Cynthia, we're all so grateful for your time, your wisdom, your energy, and also all of the efforts and space holding that you do as a She Recovers coach as well. Our community is just so deeply impacted by the work that you do, and it resonates throughout all of us. So I just wanted to say a special thank you for all of the volunteering and the time that you spend facilitating our twice daily gatherings as well.
Well, thank you. Teaching this stuff is really a passion of mine. And, I teach a kind of InnerAlly 101 class. So if you want to kind of dig into how to create this language for yourself, that's actually coming up in October. On October 12th, it starts, but I teach that kind of on the regular. So you can always be looking out on my social media. A fun place to hang out is actually the InnerAllies Facebook group when Facebook is not down. But that is a fun place to hang out because that is where people post different memes and things that have to do with self-compassion and taking good care of yourself. And it's more general than just recovery, but there's certainly recovery pertinent things in there.
Brilliant. Is the name of the group InnerAllies group? Is that what people can search on Facebook?
Yeah. So if you just go to Facebook and you type in InnerAllies, ALLIES, then you're going to get it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So just wanted to take a moment to tell everybody in this space and to those who are watching the recording that next Monday, which would be October 11th at 11 o'clock PST, we have 2 special guests joining us to speak about Latinas and mental health and busting the barriers and embracing recovery with She Recovers coach Pamela and community member Miriam. So we would love to have you join us for that, either in the private webinar or if Facebook decides to get up and running again in a week. We will be broadcasting live live there as well. So just a special thank you to everyone who makes this series possible for all of us. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who tuned in today and showed up and held space and brought forward their vulnerable questions. We truly are stronger together. And of course, for more information about She Recovers Foundation and all of the recovery-focused programs, resources, and touch points we have available, please do visit sherecovers.org. We would love to have you join one of our twice-dated gatherings that we mentioned, or another Mental Health Monday session in the future. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cynthia, again for your time. What a wonderful way to start the week. Deeply appreciate all of you.